faith arrived in Korea very late, in the 19th century. And during the years of 1839 and 1867, those 28 years, there was continuous persecution, particularly 4 persecutions. 1839, 1846, 1866, 1867. There were these times there was attack against the church, attack against the faith. And the faith was still very young. Many of those who were being persecuted were newly baptized. They were new Catholics. They had just come to embrace the faith, and here they were already in the very early years under this great persecution. This is not something uncommon, but something very common. When the faith arrives in a particular nation, the immediate response is the rejection of the faith because it challenges not only the belief system, but the moral system as well. The Catholic faith invites us to step it up and to actually act in the image and likeness in which we were created in God himself. And so there usually is a response and a reaction against Christianity when it first arrives. And it's so beautiful when you read the accounts of Andrew Kim and companions, the beautiful Korean martyrs we celebrate today, because you see men and women who truly and really loved this new faith that they received. It's very beautiful how they understood the depth of God's love for them and their willingness to die for love of Christ. When they received the faith in these nations that never had faith before, maybe never even heard of Christianity before, or Judaism for that matter, they were delivered from paganism, there was a rejoicing in those initial days because they know what it's like to be under the oppression of a pagan culture, what it's like to be under the oppression of what they thought were gods, but no more than demons that they were worshiping. And so the deliverance that they received from paganism through Christ, through the sacraments, there is a rejoicing and a joy because they now have a newfound freedom. They discover that there is only one true God who has loved them, became man, gave his life for love of them, and has invited them into his very life itself through the sacramental order. I think oftentimes we who have known Christianity, maybe even not have been Christians from our birth, but have known of Christianity, often take it for granted to such a degree we don't recognize the preciousness of it. And because perhaps we become so familiar with Christians committing sin and then going to confession or whatever, or confessing their sins, whatever they try, whether you're watching the TV evangelist who's crying because he sinned and so forth and shouting it out, or you see the confession line, we've gotten accustomed to being, sinning and just going back to the Lord for mercy and not really taking the seriousness of sin as serious as it should be, where you don't find that so much in these early Christians who understood the love of God so deeply that they also understood the horror of sin and how detestable it is. St. Andrew Kim, in his beautiful exhortation, he was a priest, Andrew Kim, among the 103 Catholics who were martyred in those 28 years. There was just a couple of priests, a couple of bishops, but the majority were lay people. But Father Andrew Kim Taejon was a priest, and in his writings, his exhortations to his people to remain faithful despite the persecutions, he has this beautiful line. He said, "Yet what good will this do us if we are Christians in name alone and not in fact? We would have come into the world for nothing. We would have entered the church for nothing. We would have betrayed even God and his grace. It would be better never to have been born than to receive the grace of God and then to sin against him." It's amazing. Here is this man who himself was a convert to Catholicism, studied and then became a priest, and is exhorting others who also came out of paganism and came into the faith, into the waters of baptism. And he's saying to them, what good is it? It would be better for us never to have been born than to have received the grace of God and sin against him. How beautifully he understands his faith. He understands the love of God. He understands all that God has done for him. And he says it's better not just that they would have been baptized and then betrayed God, but better that they never been born and then come to Christ and then to abandon him. He sees the horror of sin and truly what sin is, and how horrific it is, how destructive it is. By using that phrase that it's better that we never been born, it would be better had we never been born than to have to receive the grace of Christ and abandon the grace of Christ. Now, he's not denying the mercy of God. He's not denying the grace of being able to come back into God's love and so forth. He's not denying that people can fall into sin and come back. But he's really trying to exhort them to fight with all of their strength against sin and to fight with all of their strength against betraying our Lord. Because he's trying to say it is so bad. It's better that we not be born than betray our Lord. And so he's really trying to make that strong argument of how serious sin really is. We oftentimes, I think we do, take God's mercy for granted, and we don't recognize the seriousness of sin. There is a certain, perhaps a thought, a mindset of the presumption of God's mercy out there, of, well, I can just do this and go to confession. Or, well, God's all merciful, so, well, I'll just go to confession. This presumption that seems to be in our Christian culture, I just said our Catholic culture, but in the Christian culture, where we think that we can just presume on God's mercy and move forward, as if it's okay, and then we take advantage of perhaps his mercy because we didn't fight against sin. We just kind of sloughed it off as, it's just sin. Where we have to realize how serious it is. It's a good day to reflect upon the seriousness of sin and how much it can destroy us, how much it can destroy a relationship with God, the seriousness of even venial sin. I heard a beautiful reflection one time between the difference between mortal sin and venial sin, where venial sin is bending the branch, and you're bending the branch of a tree, and the life of the vine is still getting to the branch, but it's being inhibited by the bending of the branch. Where mortal sin is the branch is actually broken off and is sitting next to the tree. It's lying on the ground dead. It needs to be regrafted back onto the tree. It looks alive, but it's only going to be alive for so long. But it's dead because it's off the tree. Now, with venial sin, we have to be careful because you're bending that branch, and you keep bending it, eventually it's going to break. Right? It's not taking serious enough venial sin, which eventually will break us away from God if we persist in it. And perhaps that's the great sadness of sin, is the separation from God. That's the horror of it, to be separated from him. If we take enough time to reflect upon the depth of God's love and the beautiful sacramental order that sustains us in grace and so forth, and everything the Lord does for us minute by minute, day by day, hour by hour, and then to betray that, we have to ask, for what? To what end? For what and to what end? For a little bit of pleasure here, for a little bit of this there, for a little bit of adulation and pride here. We're going to betray our Lord for these things that have absolutely nothing to offer us, and all of which leads to nothing but self-destruction. And far worse, offense against God and destruction of our relationship with God. Not worth it at all. So today we ask Andrew Kim Taejon and his companions to intercede for us, that we might perhaps have a bit of that sense of the seriousness of sin, a sense so serious, that understanding of the seriousness of sin to such a degree that we would have that deep understanding that it would be better if we not have born than to sin against him, so that when sin approaches us and sin is brought before us and the sin is presented to us, we could say, no way. It's better that I've never been born than to do that, or to think that, or to say that, or not to do what I'm supposed to do right now. It would be better that I've never been born than do that and fall into any of that stuff, because the Lord has loved me and I have loved the Lord. May God bless you and Merry Christmas.